recorded, and it will be uploaded to our website and CVTV. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the class, so please save your questions until the end. You each have microphones. Each row has 2 of them, and if you push the button and the light turns green, it's live and you can ask your questions at the end. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victoria Abram. I've been with the county for almost 9 years. I work in development engineering as a planning technician. Today we're going to talk about stormwater minimum requirements 1 through 5 in the application process. So what is stormwater? Stormwater is rain, snow melt, or any other precipitation that runs off of hard surfaces and it's not absorbed into the soil. Untreated stormwater might flow directly into a local stream and negatively impact habitat or wildlife. Our goal for stormwater is to reduce all the runoff and treat it before it's able to pick up pollutants along the way. Building permits require stormwater runoff to be accounted for and addressed through best management practices, also known as BMPs. The primary purpose of the BMPs is to protect uses of water resources by reducing pollutant loads and concentrations, reducing discharges, and reducing deviations from the natural hydrology. Stormwater minimum requirements 1 through 5 will be triggered if you replace or add between 2,000 and 5,000. 5,000 if you install more than 5,000, you would trigger 1 through 9. However, if you stay underneath the 5,000 limit and more than 2,000, you would trigger 1 through 5 stormwater. The plans do not need to be designed by a licensed engineer, and it requires an E&G application to be applied for. The application fee for the stormwater is $345. The surfaces that we count are hard surfaces. A hard surface is an impervious surface, a permeable pavement, or a vegetated roof. Impervious surfaces count as roof. Impervious surfaces count as a non-vegetated surface, which either prevents or retards the entry of water into the soil below, causing water to run off the surface in greater quantities at an increased rate. Replaced hard surfaces, that's for structures, it's going to be down to the foundation. For other surfaces such as roads or patios, other hard surfaces, it's the removal down to the bare soil or the base course and replacement of that hard surface. So there are 5 minimum requirements. Minimum requirement number 1 is the preparation of a stormwater site plan. You must prepare a stormwater plan to demonstrate how the minimum requirements will be met. The objective of this is to outline the existing and post-developed conditions on the project site, describe the proposed stormwater facilities that you'll be using, and present the stormwater analysis. Minimum requirement number 2 is erosion and sediment control during construction. Projects are responsible for preventing erosion control and discharge of sediment and other pollutants into receiving waters. Instructions for documenting and complying with the erosion and sediment control requirements are given in the erosion control application, which is part of the submittal requirements for the stormwater. There's 13 BMPs, some of which may not apply to your project, but we ask that you use all the applicable ones to the most extent possible. Minimum requirement number 3 is source control of pollution. The intent of the source control BMP is to prevent stormwater from coming into contact with pollutants. These are a cost-effective means of reducing pollutants into the stormwater and therefore should be first consideration in all projects. Minimum requirement number 4 is preservation of natural drainage systems and outfalls. The objective of this BMP is to minimum requirement is to preserve and utilize natural drainage systems to the fullest extent practicable because of the multiple stormwater benefits the systems provide. This will also prevent erosion at the downstream of the discharge locations. For this BMP, you would want to maintain your natural drainage patterns on site. No project is allowed to material increase or concentrate stormwater runoff onto your neighboring property or block existing drainage patterns. And the last minimum requirement is minimum requirement number 5 for on-site stormwater management. Projects must use on-site stormwater management BMPs to disperse, infiltrate, and retain stormwater runoff from the site's roofs, driveways, parking areas, patios, and landscaped areas to the extent feasible without causing any flooding. How to apply for a minimum requirement 1 through 5 application. To start, you're going to visit our CCLMS website. You would need a user account to apply for the permits. Once logged in, you would select all land development applications and then final engineering. Complete all the required information, which is mainly owner information and property information. You would upload the application and a site plan to CCLMS. Staff will then review the application and add the appropriate fees. You'll receive a fee sheet via email. Fees can be paid online or in person at the permit center. Once the fees have been paid and the application is submitted, an invitation to upload plans will be sent via email to the applicant from Project Docs, our e-plan review system. Once accepted, our review timelines are as follows. First review would be 21 days from date of submittal. Second review, 14 days. Third review, 7 days. Clark County does utilize the two systems, CCLMS and Project Docs e-plan review. CCLMS captures the fees and the application. However, the Project Docs system, we ask for you to upload the plans to so that staff can review these electronically. This also saves the applicant from having to make multiple trips down to the county to submit revised plans if needed. Some additional fees or permits that might come with the stormwater review. The grading review is based on how much land you disturb. There's a couple different criterias that would help you determine whether or not a grading permit is required. It depends on whether or not your property is urban or rural, what the size of your property is, and how much earth material do you intend to move. There's a photo on the right that kind of breaks it down that you would be able to utilize to determine whether or not a permit would be required. A geological hazard review. If there's steep slopes, severe erosion hazards, and or landslide hazard areas on your property, we would require a geo report to be submitted along with your requirements if you're building within a proximity to those slopes. This is just to protect the land as well as what you're building in your structure. The fire marshal review is an additional fee that would be added onto the stormwater permit. It's a $74 fee. It is whether or not your driveway, if you install a new driveway or if you modify your driveway and it's longer than 300 feet, the fire marshal will be reviewing the plans to ensure that they have adequate turnaround space for their trucks. A road approach or a sidewalk permit. If you're constructing a new driveway approach onto a public right-of-way, an APS permit would be required. That is a separate permit and will not be included within the ENG application. Our geographic information system, I'm going to show you, I'm not going to show you, I'm just going to go over a couple of the layers that our department looks at on submittal intakes, which kind of helps you determine whether or not these additional fees or reports may be needed. Back in, for our wetland habitats learning lab, the folks covered the GIS Maps Online system very well, so I'm going to refer back to that video if you'd like to learn a little bit more. I've also included some links in the bottom right corner that they do have a lot of helpful tutorials and helpful instructions on how to find information and print maps and a bunch of helpful stuff. But on the left, I have some highlighted layers that are located in the environmental tab. The first is the flood zone designation. The flood zone designation, you cannot build within the floodway. However, if your structure is located in close proximity or within the floodway fringe, a floodplain inquiry or permit would be required. The contour lines are important since it's a requirement to be on your plan set. The slopes and geological hazards is where it comes into the geo report. We use the severe erosion hazard area and then the steep slopes and landslide hazard areas. If you look on the picture to the right, the map, it's of Louisville Park. There's some steep slopes and little landslide hazard areas represented by the darker colors. Once you're in Maps Online, you can go ahead and click on the eye. That's to the left of just this little eye right there. And it will give you exactly which steep slope or landslide hazard area that is. That will also come in really handy for the soil group, which is down here. The soils are important because some soils are not best suited for infiltration. Some soils drain better than other soils. Depending on what you have on your property is going to come into play with when you're designing your stormwater system. And Alistair's gonna talk a little bit more about that when he gets his chance. Application. Okay, so we're gonna go to the application for right now. Just run through the first couple pages. I'll handle the first couple pages. Alistair is then going to take over when it comes into the charts and the more technical things. So for the stormwater plan application, this is the application you would submit. The first couple boxes is for the applicant information, your site information, just project address and parcel number. You could also find that on GIS, our Maps Online system. For the application type, you would have roof and crawl space drainage, MR number 1 through 5. The post plan would be if you were to have a MR 1 through 5 application approved, and then you were to change or modify your plans in any way for the building layouts or driveway layouts, anything to change outside of the actual building themselves, it would require a post plan to be submitted. The grading would apply if you were to move over the certain amount of land, earth materials, and then the geological hazard area and road modification. If you don't know if those apply to your project, that's okay too. At application, we look for these things and we'll be able to contact you and get more information. If we do have any questions regarding these, we try to charge all of our fees up front rather than at the end of the process. We'll have some signatures on the bottom of the page, and then the second page is the project impacts. For the box line A, you'll have the total site area, which is just the site area of your parcel. For line B, you'll have new hard surface area. So if you're building a new building, you would want to enter your new roof and square footage. If you build any driveways, gravel or pavement, we would require that square footage to be accounted for as well. Any patios or hard covers, those also need to be accounted for as hard surface. For item C, it would be replaced hard surface area. That's where it goes back to if you were replacing a building, if you're tearing it down to the foundation, we would need to count that as replaced hard surface. And if it was for a driveway or any other hard surface, then you would count it if you were tearing it down to the base course or bare soil. You would add those totals together for line D. Lines E and F are not commonly filled out. That's when you're converting the native vegetation on site into lawns or landscaped areas. And then for line G, we would have the total area of the land disturbing activity. And the submittal requirements. The first set here is for projects or parcels within a recorded subdivision. Minimum requirement 2 is handled through the permit center during their reviews. And minimum requirement number 1 through 5. This does not need to be designed by an engineer licensed in the state of Washington. We would need this application in pages 1 through 4. You would need your stormwater plan, your erosion control plan, which is where you're meeting the BMPs. There's back to the 13 BMPs that are in a separate erosion control application. You would essentially decide if that BMP is going to be effective for your project, and if it is, you would go ahead and mark that it was, and then on the relating plan, you would just show us where that BMP is located. The building plot plan helps us to identify the fees at intake, as well as make sure that it matches with the building department when you go to permit any buildings. Another item is going to be the stormwater narrative addressing minimum requirements 1 through 5, or a stormwater application from pages 1 through 25 if meeting list 1, and pages 1 through 14 if meeting low impact development, which stands for abbreviated by LID. And then the last item will be abbreviated stormwater pollution plan, which is a SWIP, or the erosion control plan, which is the 13 BMPs. On 1 through 5 projects, we see a lot of the erosion control plans in place of the SWIPs. They are a shorter, more compact version of the SWIP. And then we're just back to our definitions, just the hard surface, the impervious surface, which is any surface that prevents or retards the water from the entry of water into the soil below. The replaced hard surface. And then we also have that converted vegetation areas definition along with the native vegetation. If you do happen to trigger that, you'll just want to enter that square footage on the table up above. And then if you need help deciding what BMP what minimum requirements you're going to meet, there's a couple flow charts. This first one is for new development flow chart. And this is where I'm going to let Alistair take over.
Good morning, everyone. Alistair Dawson, also with Development Engineering, about 4 years now. So this is going to help you ascertain which direction you want to go in. I'm going to focus again on minimum requirement number 5 specifically, and I'm also going to take you down a specific path that I think is going to be the easiest for the homeowners to complete on their own. And then I'll get into the caveat. There's a much more technical and detailed methodology that may need to be utilized, but we're going to go over the easiest way first. So this first box just says how much existing impervious surface do you have. That will tell you if you're using the right flow chart. Let's just focus on a new home construction to make it simplified. So you can take a look at figure 1.3 for redeveloped flow. We're not going to get into that in any detail today. So here's the checklist. Just keep in mind that everything in the checklist may not apply to your project. We try to cover the majority of the basics, but some things that's not on the checklist may apply, as Victoria spoke earlier, and there are some things on the checklist that maybe are just not applicable. We try to get your plan sheets set up for your stormwater and your erosion control. We'll show you some examples of those in a little bit. So this really is where things get interesting. There are 2 fundamental methods in order to satisfy criteria number 5. So you're gonna most likely choose between, so list number 1 equates to minimum requirements 1 through 5. There is a list number 2 that's for if minimum requirements 1 through 9 are triggered. So we're not going to go over list 2 today. They're very similar though. We're primarily going to focus on the list method. Just so you know, there is the LID performance standard that is going to require continuous flow modeling. There is some free software available for that. We might touch on later, but again, this is kind of asking you to choose your own adventure and which way you're going to focus the rest of the report on. They're going to ask you very specific questions about the low impact development performance standard or the list method. So you would only need to choose one or the other. So I think I'm going to jump back now. Nope. Should have tried that earlier. So this slide is just to highlight again that I'm going to focus on minimum requirement number 5. Oh, let me go back to the pretty version, which is, which one? No? How about that one? Current slide. Okay, sorry about that. So I highlighted minimum requirement number 5 to let you know at this point in the presentation, we're not going to talk about the first 4 and we're going to focus on 5. So this is an example of a stormwater plan. The most common BMPs that we see on new home constructions, actually this is for a shop, I believe, a detached shop. Still similar, it's still a new structure. So typically they have a T5.10C, which is in this case going to be splash blocks. These are going to be dispersion BMPs. I think I have a slide at the end that kind of talks a little bit more about that. And then that would be for the roof, and then the driveway is T5.12. And they talk about vegetated flow paths, and we like to preserve the native vegetation as much as possible, so that comes up a lot. And oftentimes what's feasible for your site depends on how big your site is. If you don't have a lot of room, you're not going to be able to meet full dispersion, which is going to require 100-foot native vegetation flow paths. So you're going to be dictated by your geometry. This is an example of an erosion control plan. Fundamentally, we like to see silt fence at the bottom of slopes or surrounding the project area, maybe some visqueen sheeting for stockpiles. So there are some very specific things mentioned in the manual as far as infiltration rates. If you have less than 0.3 inches per hour as your infiltration rate, then you're not required to infiltrate. I feel like I'm going to skip around a little bit. So this is table 2.1. This is from the Clark County Stormwater Manual, Book 1. And this is going to prioritize the BMPs for you. So this is going to be similar. There is a table in the stormwater application and in the appendix of the stormwater manual that goes over the feasibility. So these are overlapping, but just from a top level view, you're going to have your highest priority levels first. So T5.13 is going to be post-construction soil quality and depth, and that's going to be for lawn and landscaped areas that are disturbed during construction. And then they go over, there's the full dispersion. So one thing I wanted to mention as far as the priority is that ecology would like you to infiltrate first. I will say that infiltrating is going to be a little bit more complicated because you have to hire a geotech to go out there and do an infiltration test for you, or some other civil engineers are capable of performing the service as well. If you have mapped geological hazards on site, it may be an opportunity for you to go ahead and get an infiltration test done at the same time, since they're already going to be out there inspecting for mapped geological hazards. So they are, I guess, full dispersion is number one, which is not infiltration based, but downspout, full infiltration, permeable pavement, rain garden, bioretention. Those are going to be higher on the priority list than, as I mentioned earlier, the things that I see most commonly for new home constructions. If you skip down to the middle toward the bottom, downspout dispersion is T5.10C, has a level 3 priority for roofs. Sheet flow dispersion or concentrated flow dispersion for driveways, other hard surfaces in this case, are also priority level 3. So a little bit further down on the priority list, but it still works, and we're going to go over some stipulations that may lead you down that path. So when Victoria mentioned earlier, you can check your soil groups on GIS. And the reason that that's important is there's a couple different definitions. They kind of overlap. I'm going to say generally for the purpose of this presentation, on this slide, if you fall into the top two categories, soil group 1, soil group 2 for WIM soil groups, those are going to be really well draining soils, and that's going to allow the water to get through. So what that means is your site's probably going to be suitable for infiltration. So we're going to skip to 3 and 4, which are moderately or maybe not so well draining. So 3 or 4 is what you're going to look for WIM groups. And then for hydrologic soil groups, I believe there's layers for both in GIS. So again, toward the top, A and B, pretty good. You can see the pretty pictures off to the right. Once you get down to C and D, you're going to look, if you have any type of clay soils on site, you can see that they're not really conducive for infiltration. So what that means to you is that we're not going to make you infiltrate if you can identify that you have these conditions on site. So these are just a couple quick check bullet points. This first one is a definition of what you're going to model for low impact performance. It's also very technical. So this is if your site is suitable for infiltration. So one of the things that you can also look at for feasibility is you need to have a certain amount of vertical groundwater separation in order to infiltrate. You're probably going to need more separation. But if you have high groundwater on site, if you have seasonal ponding on site, if there are wetlands on site or nearby, you may have high groundwater that's going to make it very hard for you to infiltrate, and the water is probably just going to perk up. So a couple things to be aware of. Typical. All right, so these are, if you're going to use a list method, you have either a known infiltration rate, you have known soil type, you have known groundwater levels, and this also equates, so here's your reference here. I'm going to jump to page 17 through 25 of the application. It's also available in the Clark County Stormwater Manual under the appendix. So if we skip down, there's another, looks like figure 1.2 essentially. So they have the figures in the stormwater manual. We're gonna skip down. We went through the soil assessment. We're gonna say that infiltration rate is NA. Maybe you know about the groundwater, maybe you don't. So this is the checklist that you're gonna fill out, and it's gonna help you decide what's feasible for your site, assuming that we're not gonna infiltrate. So you're going to go over whatever applies to you. If you're only building either a house or a driveway, sometimes you do only build one or the other. You're going to check what's applicable. So again, this is basically going to equate to the table that I showed you earlier in order of priority. So as soon as you get a yes, you can skip down, and that makes that BMP infeasible. So you can see the bottom line that's highlighted. Determination is full dispersion into native vegetation feasible. So that's where you're going to need to check yes or no until you keep going through this until you hit a yes. I will tell you that in some versions of this, the order is not necessarily the same priority level that the table shows. So I would cross-reference that. So let's just say that we cannot preserve 65% of the site in a natural or forested condition. We say yes up here, that makes the BMP infeasible, and then we keep going through the checklist. This is full dispersion to pasture or cropland. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we're just gonna pretend that I know what's happening on your site, and we're gonna skip down a little bit further here. So downspout dispersion, BMPT 5.10C. This is going to ask you to evaluate your setbacks, make sure it's not too close to your neighbor, make sure it's not too close to, if you're in the rural area, you may be on septic, so you'll just want to evaluate where that is in relationship to your stormwater BMPs. There are going to be some grade restrictions, which is why it's going to be important to know if there's steep slopes on your site. So downspout dispersion is going to cap out at 15%, and then T5.12 concentrated flow dispersion, sorry, that's sheet flow, is going to max out at 20%. So you're going to need to be aware of that. If you have steep slopes in the area, those may not even be feasible. There's also setbacks to steep slopes that may be different than a setback to your property line. Typically it's 10 feet to a property line, but you can see that if you're within 50 feet of a map geological hazard, you're gonna need your geotech to evaluate whether that BMP is gonna be safe for that application. We don't want to impact the stability of those slopes. So those are the most common examples that we see, and I think that's primarily what I wanted to let you know about, is how you get to use the list method and where you can find the information to check the design standards and give you a little bit more information about the soil groups. Oh, it's not pretty again, sorry. So if you do have to go into the low impact development performance standard, you're going to need continuous flow modeling so that you can specifically and technically evaluate. Essentially, we want you to leave the site in as good or better condition than when you found it. So as Victoria said, we don't want you to concentrate flows off-site. I mean, number one, that's being a good neighbor, but number two, it can create erosion and some downstream hazards that we want to avoid. So we want to try to keep everything on site if we can. If your site is suitable for infiltration, There is some free information out there. It's up to you and how savvy you are if you want to try to tackle that. There will be some graphs that will be an output of some of this software, and you'll need to be able to interpret and explain and model your BMPs in the software. So I don't know about you, it's pretty technical. You might want to think about hiring somebody. It's not required, and you'll have to go online and try to find some material, some tutorials on how to help you guide through that. Of course, once you get your application submitted, if it turns out that you think that you can use the list method and we review it and we say, maybe you should take another look at infiltration. Of course, once you start the process, you can engage with county staff and we can try to help you go in the best direction and the most feasible direction possible. This is just showing you a couple highlights that typically T5.10c is used for roofs. Hopefully your vegetative flow path is not more than 15%. And then T5.12 sheet flow dispersion is typically used for driveways or other hard surfaces like your patio maybe. And you're gonna hopefully have a vegetative flow path of less than 20%. And the lengths are going to be defined in the stormwater manual, and I think that they're going to ask you about it in the LID feasibility checklist. And then T5.13, post-construction soil quality for other disturbed areas that maybe are outside of your vegetative flow path and outside of your BMPs. Here are some helpful links. Here is the Clark County Stormwater Manual. The most current version is 2021. Erosion control information, Department of Ecology has some information. Clark County adopted a lot of these stormwater requirements from ecology, so that's a good resource if you don't understand something that we're telling you to do and you want to know where it came from. Stormwater management, stormwater application, the link is here for that as well. Thanks for coming.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask.
I have a question. Is it ever required to hire someone to do a stormwater plan?
If you trigger minimum requirements 1 through 9, you are required to hire an engineer that's licensed in the state of Washington.
I have another one.
April again?
If I made a driveway when I was logging my property 3 years ago and then gravelled the driveway, do I have to count that in my stormwater plan when I go to build my house?
That's complicated. So when you built this driveway, did you permit this driveway?
I think that it was an existing logging driveway from when they were larger parcels.
So we would have to evaluate. I know sometimes the forest practices have permits that you can get if it's a logging road, if it's an existing road or driveway, and you add gravel to it. We want you to permit all the hard surfaces. We want you to tell us what you're doing and we'll evaluate it. So I'll give you an example. It may or may not be directly related to your question, but if you go ahead and put some gravel down on your driveway, or you make a new driveway, you lengthen your driveway, and then you decide to come back in for a land use application or maybe a stormwater application, we're going to take a look at your site, go back through the aerials and see if you added any unpermitted hard surfaces after 2009. Then we're going to ask you to evaluate that as part of the stormwater process. So please let us know. We'll let you know if you're underneath the thresholds and you don't need a permit. If it's something you might inherit this lovely problem from the previous homeowner that we find out, and somebody will say, oh, I don't know, I just bought the house it should be part of the due diligence process to go back through and see what was done and what has a permit and maybe what doesn't, to see if you want to inherit that liability.
I'm Michelle Dawson with Development Engineering as well. Specifically for your question, April, if the road was constructed as part of your forest practice permit, those roads are not considered permanent and would need to be added to your stormwater application. But if it was constructed prior to your forest practice, it could be considered existing potentially, which is why we would have to go back through and do all that research.
I know you got one, Jennifer. I got backup now.
Last call for questions before we wrap it up. Alrighty, well, thank you for attending our June Learning Lab. We have our Learning Lab every third Thursday of each month at 11 o'clock in the same room here. And have a beautiful day.